The snow came down like judgment. It buried the small town in a silence so deep you could hear your own heart beating a guilty rhythm. On the back of Martha Boone's neck, each flake landed with a tiny cold sting. She pulled a threadbare shawl tighter, but it couldn't block out the stares. It could never block out the whispers. They said she was plain. They said she was useful, like a good shovel or a sturdy mule. They ate her bread. They praised her stews, but they looked right through her. Their words were a poison she'd been drinking her whole life, and she'd finally come to believe them. I am not worthy of love. She repeated it like a prayer. The words were a shield, a cold, heavy shield. She pushed open the mercantile door, and the heat hit her like a slap. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of lamp oil and smug satisfaction. Rosemary Harlow stood by the counter, her lips curled into a familiar sneer. Martha put her basket of bread down, the smell of yeast and warmth a small, brave thing in this cold place. "Today's loaves," she whispered. Rosemary's voice cut through the room. "She'll sell her bread, same as always, but bread don't make a woman a wife, does it?" Laughter trickled through the store, weak at first, then stronger. Martha felt her face burn. She wanted to shrink into nothing. She turned to leave, to run back to the silence of her cabin. That's when the door swung open again, bringing the storm inside with it. He was as big as the doorframe he filled. Snow clung to his hair and beard, making him look like a spirit of the mountain itself. Jedediah Crow. The town called him half mad, a man who'd spent too much time alone with rocks and wind. But when his eyes landed on Martha, they weren't mad. They were steady. They were calm. He watched her as if she were the only person in the room. The laughter died in an instant. He simply stepped aside to let her pass, but his gaze followed her out into the swirling snow. She hurried away, her boots crunching a frantic rhythm, but she couldn't outrun the feeling of those eyes on her back. Something had just happened in that store, and she had no idea what it was. Back in her cabin, the world shrank to the smell of simmering soup and the hiss of the fire. Stirring the pot was the only control she had. The steady scrape of the spoon was a rhythm that kept the darkness at bay. Cooking was all she was good for. Nothing more. The lie had been her companion for so long it felt like truth. The storm howled, rattling the window panes, and Martha settled into another long, empty night. Then came the knock. It was slow, deliberate. Not the wind. No one ever came to her door, especially not in a blizzard like this. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She cracked the door open, and there he was. Jedediah Crow, a ghost carved from ice and shadow. "Evening," he said, his voice a low rumble like stones moving deep in the earth. "Wondered if I might buy a plate of whatever you've got cooking." He wasn't asking for shelter. He was asking for her food. No man had ever done that. Not like this. She stepped back, and he filled her small cabin with his presence. He was bigger than the room, bigger than the storm outside. She set a bowl of stew in front of him, her hands shaking so badly she almost spilled it. He ate without a word. But he ate like a man starved for something more than just food. He ate like each bite was a sacrament. And he watched her, not through her, at her. She couldn't stand it. She busied herself at the fire, her back to him, feeling his gaze like a physical touch. When he was done, he placed a few coins on the table. Far too much. "Best I've had in years," he said, and then he was gone, disappearing back into the white fury of the storm. Martha stared at the coins. They weren't right. They were heavier, older. One of them had a strange mark on it, a tiny 5-pointed star, almost worn smooth. It wasn't money. It was a message. But what did it mean? She hid the coin in a loose floorboard, a cold dread creeping into her heart. Jedediah Crow wasn't just a lonely mountain man, and he hadn't come for her stew. The blizzard broke, but the cold stayed. When Jed came back to town for supplies, he didn't visit her cabin. He kept his distance. But Martha felt his eyes on her. It wasn't kind, it was protective. He was keeping a secret, and he was afraid the town would beat it out of her. The gossip changed. It wasn't just about plain Martha anymore. Rosemary Harlow's whispers now had a sharp, fearful edge. She said Martha was trying to trap the mountain man, but her eyes told a different story. Rosemary was afraid of him. Why would the town beauty be afraid of a half-mad hermit? Sheriff Amos Pike found her behind the church. He wasn't a cruel man, but his face was pale, his hands trembling. "You stay away from Crow," he whispered, his voice urgent. "Folks are talkin', and talk like that can get a woman hurt." But then he leaned closer, his eyes darting around. "It ain't just talk, Martha, that man. He ain't what he seems. He's lookin' for somethin', and you're standin' right in his way." A chill colder than any snow settled over her. The sheriff wasn't warning her away to protect her reputation. He was trying to protect her life. Martha tried to stay away. She turned her face when she saw him in town, her heart a traitor pounding in her chest. But she couldn't stop watching him. He wasn't just buying supplies. He was observing. He watched the way men stood, the way they talked. He lingered near the saloon, his eyes scanning the faces inside. He wasn't a hermit. He was a hunter. And the whole town was his hunting ground. The fear was a constant knot in her stomach. What did he want? And what did it have to do with her? The question haunted her days and terrorized her nights. She felt like a mouse being circled by a hawk, and she didn't know if he planned to save her or devour her. The breaking point came at the midwinter social. The town, desperate for a break from the snow, packed the church hall. The air was thick with cheap fiddle music and forced laughter. Martha brought what she always brought: bread. Simple, plain, useful. She set it on the table, trying to be invisible. But Ezekiel Turner, Rosemary's lout of a cousin, saw her. He snatched a loaf and held it up for everyone to see. "Here's Martha's pride," he bellowed. "Fills the belly, but who wants a woman that only brings bread?" The laughter was a physical blow. It staggered her. Ezekiel grinned and tossed the loaf out the door, where it landed in the dirty snow. A perfect symbol of how the town saw her. Worthless. Discarded. She froze, the humiliation so hot it felt like it was melting her bones. She was about to turn and run, to disappear as she always did. But then a shadow fell across the room. Jedediah Crow stepped out of the corner. He moved through the crowd, and the laughter choked and died. He walked right past Ezekiel, didn't even look at him. He went outside, bent down, and picked the soiled loaf out of the snow. With slow, deliberate movements, he brushed it clean. Then he broke off a piece and ate it, right there in front of everyone. He chewed it like it was the finest meal he'd ever had. His eyes, cold as glacial ice, finally settled on Ezekiel. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but it filled the hall like a thunderclap. "This bread," he said, "has more worth than any fool's laughter." It wasn't a defense, it was a threat. Ezekiel's face went white. No one moved. No one breathed. Martha couldn't take it. She fled the hall, tears blinding her, her heart roaring in her ears. He hadn't just saved her pride. He'd declared war. And as she ran, she glanced back and saw Sheriff Pike standing by the door, his hand resting on the butt of his pistol. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at Jed and Ezekiel, a grim expression on his face. He wasn't a lawman keeping the peace. He was a man waiting for the shooting to start. This town wasn't just cruel. It was a powder keg. And Jedediah Crow had just lit the fuse. Later that night, he came to her cabin. The knock was quiet, but it shook the whole frame. She opened the door. He stepped inside and placed the loaf of bread on her table. It was a promise. a symbol. Why? She whispered, her voice breaking. Why do you keep doing this? He stepped closer, the firelight carving deep shadows on his scarred face. Because your father was my partner, he said, and the words shattered the world she knew. He was a U.S. Marshal, and he was murdered, right here, in this town. Martha stared at him, her mind reeling. Her father? She'd been told he was a trapper who died in a rock slide before she was born. It was the story everyone knew. It was a lie. The man who killed him runs this town, Jed continued, his voice low and dangerous. He's lived here for 20 years under a false name, growing rich and respectable. He bought the sheriff. He owns the mercantile. He owns the fear. He paused, and his eyes met hers, full of a sorrow so deep it stole her breath. His name isn't Jebediah Smith. It's Silas Kane, and his daughter is Rosemary Harlow. The room tilted. Rosemary, Ezekiel. Their cruelty wasn't random. It was targeted. They knew who she was. They'd been tormenting the daughter of the man their father murdered. It was a sick generational hatred. Why didn't you tell me? She choked out. Because he was looking for something your father hid, Jed said. A ledger. It contains the proof of every crime he's ever committed. He thinks your father told you where it was before he died. He's been watching you your whole life, waiting for you to slip up. The whispers, the cruelty. It was all to keep you scared, to keep you small, so you'd never be brave enough to look for it yourself. Suddenly, it all made sense. The stares, the fear in the sheriff's eyes, Jed's strange watchfulness. He hadn't been watching her because he was interested in her. He'd been protecting a key. He'd been guarding a witness. The thought was a cold spike of iron in her gut. His kindness wasn't for her. It was for her father, for justice. So that's all I am to you, she said, the old familiar poison of worthlessness flooding back. A map, a means to an end. No, he said, and for the first time, the iron in his voice softened. He took another step closer, his rough hand reaching out, not to grab but to plead. At first, yes, I came here for vengeance, for your father. But then I saw you. I saw how you stood up to their hate, day after day, with nothing but quiet dignity. I saw the strength they tried so hard to beat out of you. He finally looked at her, not as a marshal looking at a clue, but as a man looking at a woman. I didn't just find a marshal's daughter, Martha. I found you. But before she could answer, before she could process the impossible truth of it all, the cabin door burst open. Sheriff Pike stood there, his face ashen. He knows, Crow. He knows you're a lawman. Rosemary saw the star on the coin you gave her. They're coming for you. They're coming for both of you. Outside, torches flared in the darkness, a ring of fire closing in on her small, lonely cabin. The whispers had finally become shouts. The hatred had finally picked up its guns. Jed didn't hesitate. He kicked over the table, plunging the room into near darkness. He pushed Martha towards the back wall. There's a loose floorboard under the bed, he hissed. Your father's ledger. Is it there? She shook her head, numb with terror. She'd never known. She'd scrubbed that floor 1,000 times and never suspected the secret it held. It doesn't matter now, he said, pulling his pistol. Get down. A bullet splintered the doorframe, showering them with wood. Another shattered the window above the hearth. They weren't just trying to scare them. They were trying to kill them. This wasn't a posse. It was an execution squad. They'll burn the cabin, Martha whispered, the smell of pitch from the torches filling the air. They'll burn us alive. They'll try, Jed grunted, firing a shot back into the darkness. A man screamed. Silas Kane is a coward. He won't risk his own men if he thinks I'm well armed. But they both knew it was a lie. Kane couldn't afford to have either of them walk away. Not now. The ledger was the key, and Silas thought she knew where it was. He would tear the cabin apart board by board to find it. "The bread," Martha said suddenly, her mind racing. "The bread box on the mantel. It was my mother's. My father made it for her. He carved her initials on the bottom." Jed's eyes shot to the simple wooden box, sitting just above the fire. It was the one thing in the cabin that was finely crafted, a stark contrast to the rough-hewn walls. A place so obvious no one would ever think to look. A perfect hiding spot. Just then, Ezekiel Turner's voice boomed from outside. "Give it up, Crow! Give us the girl and the book, and the sheriff might let you live." It was a lie. The sheriff was a puppet, and they all knew it. "He's trying to draw my fire," Jed muttered, reloading his pistol. But Martha saw the truth. It wasn't about Jed anymore. It was about her. They didn't need him alive, but they needed her. They needed her to tell them where the ledger was. A new plan, desperate and terrible, bloomed in her mind. "Tell them you'll trade," she whispered, her voice steady despite the thunder of her heart. "Tell them you'll trade me for safe passage." Jed stared at her as if she'd gone mad. "Never." "You have to," she insisted, her eyes locking with his. "They won't shoot me. They need me. It's the only way you get out of here alive. You can get help. You can bring back real law." She was no longer just a baker. She was a marshal's daughter. And a marshal's daughter didn't cower in the corner. She fought back, with the only weapon she had, herself. Before he could argue, she stood up. "I'm coming out!" she screamed, her voice raw. "Don't shoot!" The gunfire stopped. A tense silence fell over the snowy clearing. Jed grabbed her arm, his face a mask of fury and fear. "Martha, no!" "Trust me," she whispered, and in her eyes, he saw not the plain, timid woman the town had tried to create, but a woman forged in fire, a woman who had found her worth in the face of death. She took a deep breath and walked to the door, her hands held high. The torchlight illuminated a circle of hard-faced men, with Rosemary and Ezekiel at the front, their faces twisted with triumph. Silas Kane, a man she'd known her whole life as the kindly shopkeeper, stood behind them, his eyes like chips of ice. Justice was a long way off. Tonight, there was only survival. Silas Kane stepped forward, his kindly shopkeeper mask gone completely, replaced by the face of a cold-blooded killer. "The book, girl," he said, his voice flat. "Where did your father hide it?" Martha kept her eyes locked on his. She let a flicker of fear show, just enough to make it believable. "I don't know what you're talking about." His hand moved like a snake, and he struck her across the face. The blow sent her stumbling back. "Wrong answer," he hissed. Behind her, inside the cabin, she heard Jed let out a roar of fury, but he didn't shoot. He was holding to the plan. He was trusting her. "The ledger," Silas repeated. "The one Marshal Boone kept on me and my associates. The one he was about to take to the judge before I put him in the ground. Now for the last time, where is it?" Martha looked past him, at Rosemary, whose face was a mixture of hate and victory. "Why?" Martha asked, her voice trembling just right. "Why hate me so much?" Rosemary laughed, a high, ugly sound. "Because you're his daughter. Because every time my father looked at you, he saw a ghost, a loose end. You should have died with him." It was the opening Martha needed. She let her eyes drift towards the hearth, a quick, panicked glance. Just for a second. But it was enough. Silas's eyes followed her gaze, and a slow, greedy smile spread across his face. He saw the ornate bread box on the mantel. "Clever man, your father," he mused. He gestured with his pistol. "Ezekiel, get it." As Ezekiel moved towards the cabin, Jed made his move. He didn't go out the front. He burst through the back window in a shower of glass and splintered wood, firing as he hit the snow. Two of Silas's men went down before they even knew what was happening. It was the distraction she'd been praying for. In that moment of chaos, Martha lunged, not at Silas. She lunged for the nearest torch, dropped on the ground by a surprised gunman. She grabbed the burning brand and, with a scream of defiance, hurled it onto the cabin's dry, tinder-like roof. The roof caught fire almost instantly, flames roaring up into the night sky. Panic erupted. Silas's men were caught between Jed's gunfire from the woods and the raging inferno of the cabin. "The ledger!" Silas screamed, his greed overriding his caution. "Get the ledger!" Ezekiel, halfway through the door, hesitated, trapped between the fire and his boss's command. That hesitation cost him his life. A shot from the darkness found him, and he crumpled to the ground. Silas Cain stared, his perfect plan falling apart in fire and blood. He turned his rage on Martha, raising his pistol to shoot her down. But Martha wasn't there anymore. She had scooped up a fallen pistol and scrambled into the chaos, using the smoke and confusion as cover. This wasn't her cabin anymore. It was a battlefield. She found Jed behind a snow-covered woodpile. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice tight. "I'm fine," she said, surprising herself with how true it was. She wasn't just fine. She felt alive. "The ledger is in the box. He thinks it's about to be destroyed. He'll do anything to get it." As if on cue, Silas screamed at his remaining men, "Forget Crow! Get the box! I want that box!" The men, seeing their chance to escape the lawman's bullets, rushed the burning cabin. It was a suicide mission. The roof was groaning, ready to collapse. But the ledger represented 20 years of their crimes. Without it, they were free. With it, they'd all hang. One of them managed to fight through the smoke and flames, emerging a moment later with the bread box clutched in his arms. He tossed it to Silas just as the cabin roof fell in with a deafening crash, sending a shower of sparks and embers into the sky. Silas Cain held the box like a holy relic. He had won. He turned to Martha and Jed, a triumphant grin on his face. "It's over, Marshal." He spat Jed's true title like a curse. "You have nothing." He began to fumble with the latch on the box, but Jed just smiled. "You're right, Silas. I have nothing, but she does." Silas looked confused. He finally got the box open. He reached inside. It was empty. Of course it was empty. Martha had taken the ledger out years ago, not because she knew what it was, but because the latch was broken and she needed the box for her flour. The book, with its strange columns of numbers and names, had been sitting on her shelf for a decade, hidden in plain sight, disguised as a boring old account book. Silas stared at the empty box, his face crumbling in disbelief. That's when Sheriff Pike made his choice. He'd been a coward, a puppet on a string, but he wasn't a fool. He knew which way the wind was blowing. He drew his pistol, but he didn't aim it at Jed. He aimed it squarely at Silas Cain. "It's over, Silas." The few remaining gunmen, seeing the sheriff turn, dropped their weapons. It was finished. In the aftermath, as the law rounded up the remnants of Cain's gang, Martha stood with Jed, watching the last embers of her home die out. She had lost everything she owned, but she had found everything that mattered. She picked up the real ledger from where she'd dropped it in the snow. "This is for my father," she said, handing it to Jed. He took it, his hand closing over hers. "Your father would be proud of you, Martha." He looked at her, his eyes full of a respect and admiration that had nothing to do with her father, and everything to do with the woman who had faced down a gang of killers and set her own life ablaze to see justice done. "What will you do now?" he asked. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I guess I'll have to find a new place to bake my bread." Jed smiled, a real warm smile that reached his eyes. "I know a place," he said. "It's up in the mountains. Quiet, good water, big enough for two." The sun was beginning to rise, painting the snow-covered mountains in shades of pink and gold. A new day, a new life. The town would have to find a new story to whisper. Because the story of plain Martha Boone was over. And the story of Martha Boone, the woman who was more than enough, was just beginning. If you were on the edge of your seat listening to Martha's story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. You never know what other secrets are hiding in plain sight.